On a cool morning in March 2003, in a quiet neighborhood just outside Sacramento, California, a woman named Jennifer Hayes left her apartment to run errands. She was 28 years old, a graphic designer who worked from home, known for her punctuality and her habit of calling her mother every single day without fail. By nightfall, her car sat untouched in its parking space, her purse rested on the kitchen counter, her coffee mug still held the remnants of her morning routine, and Jennifer Hayes had simply ceased to exist. No struggle, no note, no witnesses, just the profound, terrible absence of a person who had been there and then was not. The question that would haunt investigators for nearly 2 decades was not just where Jennifer had gone, but whether the person who knew her best had been the one to make her disappear. The Elmwood Grove apartment complex sat on the eastern edge of Sacramento County, where suburban sprawl met the last stretches of undeveloped land before the foothills began their gradual climb toward the Sierra Nevada. Built in the late 1990s, the complex was one of dozens that had sprouted during the housing boom. 3-story structures arranged around courtyards with decorative gravel and struggling young trees that had not yet grown tall enough to provide shade. The units were affordable, attracting young professionals and small families, people in transition between one phase of life and another. Jennifer Marie Hayes had moved into apartment 2C in January 2002, 14 months before she vanished. She had grown up in Stockton, the daughter of Robert and Patricia Hayes, both schoolteachers who had instilled in their only child a love of art and a methodical approach to life. Jennifer had attended Sacramento State University, graduating with a degree in graphic design in 1998. She was 5 feet 6 inches tall, with shoulder-length brown hair she usually wore pulled back in a ponytail, green eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, a small scar on her left knee from a childhood bicycle accident. Those who knew her described a woman who was quiet but not withdrawn, creative but organized, someone who kept her commitments and her promises. She had been dating Marcus Webb for 3 years. They had met at a coffee shop near the university campus in 2000, when Jennifer was working as a freelance designer and Marcus was finishing his degree in business administration. He was 31, tall and athletic, with an easy confidence that Jennifer's friends found charming at first. They moved in together after 6 months. Marcus had recently started working as a sales representative for a medical supply company, a job that required him to travel throughout Northern California, sometimes staying overnight in hotels in Fresno or Redding, or along the coast. The morning of March 17, 2003, began like any other Monday. Jennifer woke at 7 o'clock. This detail would later be confirmed by her computer's activity logs, which showed she had checked her email at 7:14. She made coffee in the small kitchen, the same routine she followed every morning, using the French press that sat on the counter beside the sink. The weather that day was overcast, typical for Northern California in mid-March, with temperatures expected to reach the low 60s by afternoon. A light wind moved through the courtyard, carrying the smell of wet pavement from overnight rain. Marcus had left for work before Jennifer woke. He would later tell investigators that he departed the apartment at approximately 6:30, that he had a meeting scheduled in Stockton at 9 o'clock, that he had kissed Jennifer while she was still sleeping. His work calendar, later examined by detectives, confirmed a meeting with a hospital purchasing manager at 9:15 that morning. Surveillance footage from a gas station in Lodi, roughly 20 miles south of Sacramento, showed Marcus purchasing coffee and a breakfast sandwich at 7:42. Jennifer had 3 projects due that week for different clients. Her work was meticulous, her files organized in clearly labeled folders on her desktop computer. She had spoken with her mother on the phone the previous evening, a Sunday night conversation that lasted 18 minutes, during which she mentioned needing to pick up art supplies from the craft store and groceries for the week. Patricia Hayes would later recall every detail of that conversation, the way Jennifer had laughed about a mistake in a logo design she was fixing, the plan to visit for dinner the following weekend. At 9:37 that morning, Jennifer sent an email to a client confirming she would have the revised brochure layout completed by Wednesday. This was the last documented activity from her computer. Her phone records showed no outgoing calls after 8:15, when she had briefly called her bank to check her account balance, a call lasting less than 2 minutes. The apartment complex had no security cameras in 2003. The parking lot, the courtyard, the hallways, all existed in that pre-surveillance era when private movements remained private. The mailman who delivered to Elmwood Grove that afternoon noticed nothing unusual. The neighbor in apartment 2B, an elderly man named Frank Morty who was home most days, heard no sounds of disturbance, no raised voices, no commotion. He would tell police he had been watching television with the volume up, that his hearing was not what it used to be. Marcus returned to the apartment at 6:45 that evening. He would later describe parking his car, walking up the exterior stairs to the second floor, unlocking the door with his key. The lights were off. Jennifer's laptop sat open on the small dining table, the screen dark. Her purse rested on the kitchen counter, her wallet inside containing her driver's license and 3 credit cards. Her car keys hung on the hook by the door where she always placed them. The coffee mug sat in the sink, rinsed but not washed. Her cell phone lay on the nightstand in the bedroom, powered on, showing no missed calls. Clear's throat. Marcus would tell investigators that he initially was not concerned. He thought perhaps Jennifer had gone for a walk or had been picked up by a friend. He called her mother at 7:10, asking if Jennifer was there. Patricia Hayes felt the first cold touch of fear in that moment, something in Marcus's voice that seemed too calm, too measured. She called back 15 minutes later, asking if he had found her. He had not. At 8:33, Marcus called the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department to report Jennifer missing. The responding deputy arrived at 9:05, a young officer named Daniel Reeves who took notes in a small spiral notebook, recording the details that would form the foundation of a case that would consume hundreds of hours of investigative work. He noted the untouched purse, the present car, the absence of any sign of struggle. He noted Marcus's demeanor, which he would later describe as cooperative but oddly detached, a man reporting a missing person with the same affect someone might use to report a stolen bicycle. Because Jennifer was an adult with no history of mental health issues or substance problems, because there was no immediate evidence of abduction or harm, the initial response was measured. Deputy Reeves took a description, obtained a recent photograph, filed the report. The real search would not begin until morning. By dawn on March 18, when Jennifer had been missing for approximately 24 hours, the apartment complex woke to the presence of multiple patrol vehicles. Detective Sarah Chen from the Sacramento County Sheriff's Missing Persons Unit arrived at 7 o'clock and began the methodical process of reconstructing Jennifer's last known hours. She interviewed neighbors, walked the grounds, examined the apartment with the careful attention of someone who understood that what was absent often told more than what remained. The search expanded throughout the day. Volunteers from the neighborhood joined deputies in walking the undeveloped land beyond the complex, searching the scattered oak trees and dry creek beds for any trace of Jennifer. Her photograph appeared on the local news that evening, a smiling image from the previous summer, her hair pulled back, wearing a green sweater. The hotline received 17 calls in the first 48 hours, none yielding useful information. Part 2. The investigation. The search operation for Jennifer Hayes grew methodically over the following days, expanding outward from the Elmwood Grove apartment complex in concentric circles of increasing desperation. Detective Chen coordinated teams of deputies and volunteers who walked shoulder to shoulder through the undeveloped parcels of land, through the drainage ditches that ran along the access roads, through the small parks and commercial areas within a 5-mile radius. Search and rescue dogs were brought in on March 20, canines trained to detect human scent, but the recent rain had complicated their work, washing away traces that might have led somewhere. The community response was immediate and overwhelming. By the weekend following Jennifer's disappearance, more than 200 volunteers had registered to help with the search. They distributed flyers throughout Sacramento County, posted them in grocery stores and gas stations and community centers. Jennifer's face became familiar to thousands of people who had never known her, a young woman frozen in that summer photograph, smiling at something beyond the camera's frame. Patricia and Robert Hayes drove to Sacramento the day after Jennifer was reported missing and never left. They stayed in a hotel near the apartment complex, maintaining a presence that Detective Chen found both heartbreaking and helpful. Patricia organized the volunteer efforts, coordinating search schedules and fielding calls from media outlets. Robert stood beside Marcus during the press conferences, his face gray with exhaustion and fear, his hand occasionally reaching out to grip Marcus's shoulder in a gesture that looked like solidarity, but might have been a need for physical support. Those early press conferences revealed something that investigators quietly noted but did not immediately act upon. Marcus spoke about Jennifer in measured tones, his language precise and careful. "Jennifer is a wonderful person," he said during the March 21 press conference, standing between her parents. "She would never just leave without telling anyone. Someone knows something." Detective Chen, watching from the side, observed that Marcus never cried, never seemed to struggle with his words, never showed the raw, uncontrolled emotion that usually characterized people whose loved ones had vanished. The investigation into Jennifer's life revealed no secrets, no hidden conflicts, no dangerous relationships. Her bank records showed regular, predictable spending. Her email correspondence was professional and routine. Her friends, interviewed one by one, described a stable person in a stable relationship, someone looking forward to the future. 2 of her college friends mentioned that Jennifer had once expressed concerns about Marcus's temper, incidents where he had raised his voice or slammed doors, but nothing that had seemed dangerous at the time. Marcus submitted to multiple interviews without requesting a lawyer. He provided his work schedule, his phone records, his credit card statements. On March 23, exactly 1 week after Jennifer's disappearance, he agreed to take a polygraph examination. The results were inconclusive, a finding that meant nothing legally but that added to the growing list of small doubts accumulating in Detective Chen's notes. The timeline presented problems that became more apparent with each review. Marcus claimed he had left the apartment at 6:30 on the morning of March 17. The gas station footage from Lodi showed him at 7:42. The distance from Elmwood Grove to that particular gas station was approximately 23 miles via the most direct route. At normal traffic speeds on a Monday morning, the drive should have taken 30 to 35 minutes. Marcus had taken over an hour. When asked about this discrepancy, Marcus explained that he had stopped at a park to make some phone calls before his meeting, that he liked to prepare mentally before client presentations. He could not remember which park. His phone records from that morning showed no outgoing calls between 6:30 and 7:55, when he called the hospital purchasing manager to confirm their meeting time. Deputies whispered quietly in the hallway outside the conference room where Marcus was being interviewed for the third time. They whispered about the absence of emotion, about the timeline that did not quite fit, about the way he referred to Jennifer in the present tense during some interviews and the past tense during others, as though he could not decide whether she was coming back. The physical evidence was maddeningly sparse. The apartment showed no signs of struggle, no blood, no disturbed furniture. Forensic technicians processed the bedroom, the bathroom, the kitchen, finding only what one would expect to find in a shared living space. Jennifer's fingerprints, Marcus's fingerprints, the ordinary residue of ordinary life. Her car was examined, her computer was analyzed, her phone records were scrutinized. Nothing pointed toward anything, except a woman who had simply stepped out of her life and disappeared. Investigators canvassed the apartment complex repeatedly, knocking on every door, asking the same questions in different ways. Had anyone seen Jennifer that Monday morning? Had anyone noticed unfamiliar vehicles? Had anyone heard anything unusual? Frank Morty, the neighbor in 2B, remained consistent in his statement. He had heard nothing. His television had been on. He was 76 years old and his hearing was failing. The woman in apartment 2D, directly below Jennifer and Marcus, mentioned something that initially seemed insignificant. Her name was Linda Ochoa, and she worked night shifts as a nurse at Sacramento Medical Center. She had returned home around 7:15 on the morning of March 17, tired from a 12-hour shift. She thought she had heard footsteps above her, the sound of someone walking across the floor, but she could not be certain whether it was one person or two. The footsteps had lasted only a minute or two, then silence. By early April, the active search had diminished. The volunteers returned to their regular lives. The media coverage became sporadic. Detective Chen continued working the case, but with no body, no crime scene, no witnesses, the investigation could only circle around the same limited facts, looking for an opening that refused to appear. Marcus remained in the apartment through April and into May. He returned to work, maintaining his sales territory, driving the same routes through Northern California. He met with Jennifer's parents occasionally, awkward encounters in coffee shops where they asked if he had remembered anything new, and he always said he had not. Patricia Hayes studied his face during these meetings, searching for something she could not name, some confirmation of a suspicion she did not want to acknowledge. The case went cold not with a dramatic conclusion but with a gradual fading, like a photograph left too long in sunlight. By summer, Detective Chen had other cases demanding her attention. Jennifer Hayes became a file in a cabinet, a photograph on a wall of the missing, one more person who had walked into empty air. Part 3: The Silence. 18 months after Jennifer vanished, Marcus Webb moved out of the Elmwood Grove apartment. He relocated to Fresno, accepting a position with a different company, a fresh start in a city where people did not recognize his face or connect his name with the missing woman whose case had briefly dominated local news. He left behind the furniture, the kitchen appliances, everything except his clothes and his personal documents. The apartment manager later donated the remaining items to a local charity. Patricia and Robert Hayes could not bring themselves to leave Sacramento. They moved from the hotel into a small rental house in Carmichael, maintaining a proximity to the last place their daughter had been seen. Patricia stopped teaching. She could not stand in front of a classroom and pretend that literature and grammar mattered when her child was gone. Robert continued working, finding solace in routine, but he aged visibly in those months, his hair turning white, his shoulders developing a permanent stoop. They started a foundation in Jennifer's name, a small nonprofit dedicated to helping families of missing persons navigate the impossible bureaucracy of ongoing investigations. They held annual vigils on March 17, gathering in a park near the apartment complex with candles and photographs, and the terrible patience of people who knew the waiting might never end. For those who have ever doubted someone you love, who have felt the cold whisper of suspicion about a person you want to trust, there exists a particular kind of torture. Patricia Hayes lived inside that torture for years. She thought about the press conferences where Marcus had stood beside them, his hand occasionally touching hers in what seemed like shared grief. She thought about the times he had offered to help with the foundation, his voice steady and sincere. She thought about the timeline discrepancy that had never been adequately explained, the missing hour between his departure from the apartment and his appearance at the gas station in Lodi. She thought about these things late at night, when Robert was asleep, when the house was quiet except for the settling sounds of a structure adjusting to temperature changes. She wrote her thoughts in a journal, page after page of observations and questions, and the guilt that came from suspecting someone Jennifer had loved. The journal grew to fill 3 notebooks over the years, a private investigation conducted in the margins of official channels. In Fresno, Marcus built a new life. He dated occasionally, relationships that never progressed beyond a few months. Friends from this period would later describe him as guarded, someone who shared only surface details about his past. He told people that his previous relationship had ended badly, that his former partner had left without explanation. Technically, this was not a lie. Detective Chen never forgot the case. She reviewed the file periodically, looking for something she might have missed. In 2007, she arranged to have cadaver dogs search the undeveloped land near the apartment complex again, wondering if decomposition over 4 years might yield scents that had been absent before. The dogs found nothing. In 2009, when Jennifer would have been 34 years old, Chen attended the annual vigil, standing at the back of the gathering watching Marcus, who had driven up from Fresno for the commemoration. He stood apart from the Hayes family, respectful of their space, his expression appropriately somber. The years moved forward with the relentless momentum of time that does not care about unresolved grief. 2010 became 2011 became 2012. The foundation continued its work. Patricia Hayes became an advocate for missing persons legislation, testifying before the state assembly about the need for better databases and coordination between jurisdictions. She channeled her pain into purpose, but the purpose could not fill the absence. Then in February 2015, nearly 12 years after Jennifer's disappearance, a construction crew breaking ground for a new housing development in the undeveloped land east of the Elmwood Grove apartment complex made a discovery. The backhoe operator noticed something unusual in the soil, a color that did not match the surrounding earth. He stopped the machine and climbed down to investigate. What he found, buried approximately 3 feet below the surface, was a tarp wrapped around something that had once been human. The Sacramento County Sheriff's Department established a perimeter around the construction site within an hour. Forensic anthropologists from UC Davis were called in to carefully excavate the remains. The process took 2 days, a meticulous removal of soil and documentation of position and condition. The body had been there for years. The decomposition advanced to the point where soft tissue was largely absent, but the skeleton remained largely intact, the tarp having provided some protection from the elements and scavenging animals. Dental records confirmed what everyone already suspected. The remains were those of Jennifer Marie Hayes. The medical examiner found evidence of blunt force trauma to the skull, 3 distinct fracture points suggesting multiple impacts with a heavy object. The manner of death was classified as homicide. After 12 years of not knowing, Patricia and Robert Hayes finally had an answer, though it was the answer they had most feared. Part 4. The Revelation. The discovery of Jennifer's remains transformed the investigation from a missing persons case into a homicide case. Detective Chen, now a sergeant with the Major Crimes Unit, was assigned lead investigator. She pulled the old files from storage and began again, this time with the advantage of knowing that Jennifer had never left that Monday morning in March, that she had been killed and buried within hours of when Marcus claimed to have left for work. The burial site was located approximately 2 miles from the apartment complex, accessible by a service road that ran along the edge of the undeveloped property. In 2003, that area had been searched, but the search had focused on surface evidence, on visible signs of disturbance. No one had thought to look beneath the ground. The timeline took on new significance. Marcus had left the apartment somewhere around 6:30, according to his account. He appeared on surveillance footage at the gas station in Lodi at 7:42. The burial site was a 10-minute drive from the apartment. A person could drive there, dig a shallow grave in soil softened by recent rain, return to the apartment, and still arrive at the gas station more than an hour later. Chen interviewed everyone again. Linda Ochoa, the downstairs neighbor who was now living in Oregon, remembered the footsteps she had heard that morning. Just one set of footsteps, she now felt certain, not two. The sound of someone packing, walking back and forth across the floor above her. Frank Morty had passed away in 2008, taking with him whatever he might or might not have heard that morning. But his daughter, when contacted, mentioned something her father had told her years earlier. He had said that on the morning the young woman upstairs went missing, he thought he heard a car door slam twice in the parking lot, around 7 o'clock. He had not mentioned this to police because it seemed like normal apartment complex noise, cars coming and going. The forensic team examined Marcus's vehicle, a 2001 Honda Accord that he had traded in for a newer model in 2005. The dealership had records showing the car had been detailed before the trade-in. The new owner was located in Modesto. The car had changed hands 2 more times since then, but investigators tracked it to its current owner in Sacramento. They processed it anyway, a decade-old vehicle that yielded no useful evidence. Chen went through Marcus's credit card and bank records again, looking at the months following Jennifer's disappearance. In April 2003, he had purchased a new set of floor mats for his car. In May, he had paid for a professional detail service. These purchases proved nothing on their own, but they formed a pattern of someone removing potential evidence. On March 17, 2003, the morning Jennifer died, Marcus had been wearing work clothes, business casual attire appropriate for a sales meeting. Those clothes had never been found. His work records showed he had later submitted an expense report for replacement clothing, claiming his suitcase had been stolen from his car during a trip to Redding in late March. The Redding Police Department had no record of such a theft being reported. In June 2015, Chen traveled to Fresno with 2 other detectives. They arrived at Marcus's apartment complex at 6 in the morning, the same time of day when everything had begun 12 years earlier. Marcus answered the door in pajama pants and a t-shirt, squinting against the hallway light. Chen showed him her badge and said, "Marcus Webb, you're under arrest for the murder of Jennifer Hayes." He did not ask what they were talking about. He did not protest his innocence. He looked at Chen with an expression she would later describe as resignation, as though he had been waiting for this moment all along and was almost relieved it had finally arrived. He asked if he could get dressed. They allowed him to, with an officer present in the bedroom. He put on jeans and a button-down shirt, moving slowly, methodically. Before they led him out of the apartment, he looked around at the space he had occupied for a decade. this life he had built on top of the one he had destroyed. The arrest made national news. The case of the woman missing for 12 years finally solved, the boyfriend always suspected but never charged. Media outlets set up outside the Sacramento County Jail where Marcus was being held without bail. Patricia and Robert Hayes gave a brief statement, Patricia's voice steady despite her tears. "We never gave up hope for justice," she said. "Jennifer mattered, her life mattered, the truth matters." Marcus's defense attorney, a public defender named Richard Torres, argued that the evidence was entirely circumstantial. There was no DNA linking Marcus to the burial site, no witness who had seen him dig the grave, no confession. The timeline was suspicious but not conclusive. The injuries to Jennifer's skull could have been caused by someone else, the burial performed by unknown hands. The prosecution, led by Deputy District Attorney Michelle Tran, built their case carefully. They presented the timeline, demonstrating that Marcus had the opportunity. They presented the history of the relationship, calling friends who testified about arguments, about Jennifer's private concerns about Marcus's temper. They presented the evidence of behavior after her disappearance, the oddly calm demeanor, the careful answers, the eventual flight to Fresno. During the trial in March 2016, exactly 13 years after Jennifer's death, the courtroom was filled every day with observers. True crime followers who had followed the case online sat beside local residents who remembered the original search. Patricia and Robert Hayes sat in the front row, their faces showing the accumulated weight of more than a decade of grief. Marcus took the stand in his own defense, something his attorney had advised against. He testified for 6 hours over 2 days, maintaining that he had left the apartment that morning with Jennifer still alive, that he knew nothing about what had happened to her. Under cross-examination, Tran walked him through the timeline minute by minute, asking him to account for every moment of that missing hour. Marcus stumbled through explanations that became increasingly incoherent, finally admitting he could not remember exactly where he had stopped or what he had done. "Is it possible," Tran asked, "that you're having trouble remembering because what actually happened that morning is something you've spent 13 years trying to forget?" Torres objected. The judge sustained it, but the question hung in the air, settling over the jury like dust. The deliberation lasted 3 days. On March 24, 2016, the jury returned a verdict of guilty on one count of second-degree murder. Marcus showed no reaction when the verdict was read, staring straight ahead while behind him Patricia Hayes wept into her husband's shoulder. At sentencing 2 months later, the judge gave Marcus 15 years to life. Before the sentence was pronounced, Patricia Hayes stood and read a victim impact statement. She spoke about Jennifer's childhood, about her artistic talent, about the grandchildren she would never have. She spoke about the years of not knowing, of hopping against hope that Jennifer might still be alive somewhere. She looked directly at Marcus and said, "You took everything from us. You took her life, and then you took 13 years that we spent searching for answers you had all along. I will never forgive you." Marcus was given an opportunity to address the court. He stood, his hands shaking slightly, and said, "I'm sorry for your loss." He did not admit guilt. He did not explain what happened that morning. He offered those 5 words and nothing more, as though Jennifer's death had been something that occurred around him rather than something he had caused. Closing. The story of Jennifer Hayes is a story about absence, about the hole that remains when someone is taken from the world before their time. It is about the terrible patience required to wait for justice, about the way truth sometimes stays buried for years before finally being unearthed. It is about parents who refuse to stop searching, about a detective who refused to forget, about a community that held the memory of a young woman who deserved better than the ending she received. Jennifer's remains were cremated after the trial concluded. Her ashes were scattered at a beach in Mendocino, where the Hayes family had vacationed when Jennifer was a child, a place she had loved for its wild beauty and crashing waves. The foundation bearing her name continues its work, helping other families navigate the aftermath of disappearance, turning grief into purpose. Marcus Webb remains incarcerated at California State Prison, serving his sentence in relative obscurity. He will be eligible for parole in 2031, when he will be 63 years old. Whether he will ever fully account for what he did that March morning remains uncertain. If this story mattered to you, subscribe and hit the bell. Share the episode. Someone somewhere may still be waiting to be heard.